Hello?
We're all muting, sir, for the beginning of the show.
Just get away. Just press stop. Hello, and this is the Lying Ghost Show with your host Strife. And this show is broadcasting content to Vaughn Live. And if you come on the show, we have the right to use your material and such. And today we have.
Wow, that sucked.
Yeah, Frank, I had to kick you off.
We really worked hard on that opening.
Yeah. How about this? Let me try this. Welcome to the Lion Ghost Show. I am your host, Redline V. A few things before we start. This show is being streamed live, so it can go on YouTube later on. If you call in, that gives us the right to use your liking on YouTube without you getting mad, angry, pissed off, and DMCAing us. Please continue, Strife.
You sounded like Tosh.0.
Oh yeah!
Here, because that was way better than the lackluster opening.
Well, sorry, I
All
was
rights
off guard by
reserved.
my sister, but yeah, we have Eddie. Crap, I forget your last name.
Eddie Tabash, that's okay.
Yeah,
I'm not a household word yet.
What?
I'm not a household word yet.
Yeah.
Like some amazing hot
Eddie
sauce.
Tabash coming out of a house near you. That'll be the day. And we have Big Lundy, Atheist Coffee, and we have Tom, a new member of the Lying Ghost Show, I guess you could say, who works for the Infidel, and we have Chris Lucas, a resident particle physicist, and Fraggin Redline.
Yay.
V8.
Alrighty.
Yes.
Yippee.
Eddie, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Okay, well, what I'd like to, there are many things for the free thought community. Though I'm not a philosopher or a physicist, I obviously play one on TV because I do a substantial amount of the public speaking and primarily debating on behalf of the atheistic point of view. But I also do double duty as a separation of church and state lawyer, where through various organizations I'm involved in trying to protect government neutrality in matters of religion, which means not to deny the religious their rights, but to make sure that we non-believers have equal rights and that the legal system does not wind up privileging religion in any way. So I don't know if you want to focus on the specific arguments for atheism or whether we want to cover the legal political landscape and the danger to the church-state separation and the religious right. It's up to the hosts.
Well, I mean, earlier today you did the separation of church and state, so I think it would be better if you did the arguments for atheism, I think it was.
Okay. Well, first of all, in dealing with the arguments for atheism, what a lot of our people need to realize is it's really common sense on fire. I said earlier today in another program, and I unveiled this in the last debate I had, that I begin with the idea that there is a noise in the attic. And for 5 years, we don't know what the noise is. And every time we go up to look, we see nothing. But the noise occurs regularly at 5 p.m. every day. After 5 years, I insist that it's a gremlin from the fifth dimension. The rest of you refuse to accept it. And I say, you can't disprove. You can't prove that it's not a gremlin for the fifth dimension. Therefore, I win by default. No one would accept that. And that same reasoning has to apply to all paranormal claims and supernatural claims across the board, including the deity. Now, another thing that we have to get into is if you look at the advances in philosophy of religion on the part of atheistic arguments, and in philosophy of religion, I'm including the works of our physicists. I'm including Vic Stenger and Lawrence Krauss and Tanner Edis. I'm including all the scientific as well as pure philosophical arguments that constitute the argument that the existence of God is far less likely than likely. If you look at that, you will see obviously a giant gap between the intellectual level of atheist discourse and are still being the most unjustly despised minority in America today. So what that tells you is that the persistence of theism and theistic beliefs is not an outgrowth of the power of theistic arguments so much as it is still a political problem, and the result, the solution in my view is two-pronged. We must make our arguments because philosophy does matter, but initially we have to persuade society that it's even socially acceptable to make our arguments. I would unfortunately venture to say that a majority of Americans would even question the propriety of atheists making their arguments in public, let alone listening to what those arguments are. And so when we do get a hearing, and this is why I believe college debates, university debates are the most important, because they are a flashpoint where large numbers of students are focused in our arguments, many for the first time. Once we have the audience, I think that if we prepare ourselves properly, we can prevail. And I think that the community of young Turks, as it were, all of the bloggers and YouTube posters on the internet who are refining arguments, I think are very valuable. But the debates on God's existence on university campuses cannot be understated, and also the constant refinement of our arguments. And then we won't get into this now, but the separation of church and state is absolutely crucial, because if we were to lose legal equality, even our equal right to have access to the marketplace of ideas could be severely hampered.
Well, there's also another side of that, too. I mean, you have the scientific community that is mostly atheists who get suppressed because of a lot of the religious views, and we need to really start pushing that off to the side, which I think we've actually started doing that. And I agree with you 100%. I think that it does need to be talked about. I do think that we need to start moving in that direction.
I have a question. How do you feel, or what are some ideas that you have that would help people feel more comfortable listening to atheists? Because you said part of the two-pronged problem is not only do we have to present our arguments, but that we have to have people, allow us to present them. And obviously that means that they have to feel comfortable being around us.
That's an excellent question. Well, I think the first step is analogies to point out how in no other instance would claims of the paranormal be permitted to go by without rigorous scrutiny, and to explain to people that the fact that God is being thrown into the question box with every other kind of paranormal claim is only fair game, and that outside of politics and social pressure, there's no intellectually sound reason why the claims of religion deserve some kind of extraordinary exemption from critical examination and doubt, which no other type of supernatural claim has to undergo. I mean, there's no reason whatsoever for that kind of exemption to apply only to the religious. And then to ask people to suspend the hostility that they have toward us and hear our argument, and ask them, at the very least, even if they remain unpersuaded by our argument, even if they choose not to accept the truthfulness of our claims, to begin to see us as just one more point of view on how the universe is put together, and to be able to say, well, the difference between atheists and us is we believe the universe is supernatural, and they believe there are no supernatural agencies. The universe is only natural, and that death is the end of conscious existence. But begin to get them to think that even if they recognize that being the difference, it is not such a horrendous difference that we deserve some kind of opprobrium or hatred or being shunned. And also, we have to have literally infinite patience to do this. I think we have to go into public forums. Again, I see no more valuable forum for us than university debates. But we're going to have an experiment in a few weeks. I'm going to the Itasca Community College in Grand Rapids, Michigan on April 24th, where I will be delivering a lecture on why God does not exist. And that evening, I'll be speaking at a forum to the general community in northern Minnesota about why there is no God. And I preface my remarks with a call for suspension of hostility and request the arguments, even if they are unpalatable at first blush, be viewed as opposed to viewed with hostility and the predetermined notion that I must represent something unconscionably evil. It could take 100 years, but it's worth doing.
Two things occurred to me there. Two things occur to me in regards to those. You're absolutely right. However, the true believer will always see the atheistic perspective as a threat, because if you truly believe that there is a heaven and there is a hell, and somebody like me or somebody like you, in just speaking and putting forward arguments that can convince people, are putting their children, their loved ones, their family members in danger of an eternal damnation in hell, then they can never give us the same platform. In the same way, they can never look at their own beliefs as
there.
You're very right. But then what we're trying to get to is, in a general audience, you will have a lot of true believers, but there might be people who are religious as a matter of sense, it's the right thing to do, who are amenable. Last weekend, I was at the 50th anniversary American Atheist Convention in Austin, Texas. We had about 938 people registered. And they took a poll from the podium. And the majority of us who were former believers in something or another were actually converted to atheism, power of some argument, and more so than people would realize, or some realization that somebody triggered about the supernatural, the paranormal, or about the natural world, or about the overwhelming problem of evil. So while you're right, the true believer or the arch fundamentalist is going to try to deprive us of the platform. Once we have a college audience or a general population audience, we will sow seeds of doubt. We will sow seeds of doubt.
And a logical argument and scientific fact are very powerful.
I'll give you an example. In 2001, I did a tour of Canada debating their head of what their Campus Crusade for Christ, I think it was called the New Scholars Society. One of our debates was at Queen's University in Kingston, and about 10 students in the Christian entourage afterwards, that dent their belief in a supernatural being, but I made them doubt the fundamental fairness of exclusive salvation through Jesus, and I told them they made my whole trip worthwhile. You know, any chipping away at the monolith of religious domination is worth it at this stage.
Yeah, I find that the more you learn, the more facts you gather, the deeper you look at things, the less rational the idea of God becomes.
Yeah.
Whereas the more ignorant you are, the more rational it is. Part of maybe your approach should be to almost, without even regarding God, teach them some of the science, some of the neat things we've discovered and how they've been practical and helped us in our lives. And to a few of them, it might click in, wait, that contradicts what the Bible says, or wait, then where's God? And eventually, someone might put the connection together, and those particular people will benefit from this, that, oh, I don't really necessarily need to believe in this God. He keeps failing on these tests that, nature puts forth. And why would nature challenge God? Huh.
Yeah, for instance...
That's true if you have a lot of time, but if you have a finite amount of time with an audience, you had better make that connection.
Yeah, I was just
because if you're there to discuss why God does not exist, you had better finish drawing the lines for them. But it's true if you have more time to work with someone on an individual basis or in small groups, then you can begin to so-called boil the frog slowly.
I've noticed that if you promote engineering, because there's very few engineers out there that are very religious, in my opinion. They may believe in God, but they're not really, in their faith. And I've noticed because what you're learning in there, like, I'm just starting to study engineering, but I'm like fascinated with AC/DC currents. And as I'm studying this thing, I'm learning more about just how things really are. And it gets me more wanting to know about the deeper things. And this information almost confirms, this notion of a God is unnecessary. So maybe, as you make your points, promote certain paths, certain degrees. Get people to want to pursue these particular paths, and they'll do it themselves. They'll learn the stuff themselves. So,
and also, let's not discount the value of certain tragedies. My mother was an Auschwitz survivor from Hungary, and in 2005, on the 60th anniversary of her liberation, I went there with a pretty high-heeled Jewish group, and we spent a day going through Auschwitz, and they asked me to say a few words, and I said that where we are, the place we were standing, anything less than atheism is an insult to the extent of horror that occurred at this place 60 years ago. And I had even rabbis nodding their heads. And of course, you don't usually have a prop as powerful as Auschwitz standing in the middle of some burnt down gas chamber. But I was able to use that, I think, to powerful advantage. The other thing, too, is sometimes we need to be honest with people what their motivations are. I have a suspicion. If you gave the overwhelming majority of religious Americans two choices. One, live in a universe with a God, but you die at the age of 70 and death is the end. Or live in a universe without God, but live forever, they would take the latter. I believe that many people cling to religion and God belief because they see it as the only way to somehow get a possible foothold into immortality.
Well, the biggest thing atheists, new atheists especially, have to struggle with is the finite reality of death. I mean, when morality in this final sense, it's a very scary thing. It's mentally almost unbearable for a great many, especially that I've talked to. It seems that it was for me, it was for, I think, probably all of us who've come out of religion especially. But yeah, that's the biggest thing. The reason that people hold on to it is because, I mean, what's the alternative? I die and that's it. So I have to hold on to some kind of faith, and that's quite often the moderate standpoint.
See, I can't tell you how many countless liberal Jews tell me when we discuss these things that they see the prospect for a supernatural God as very thin, but they can't bring themselves to accept that all the 6 million who died in the Holocaust were annihilated forever. because it's just too much for them to bear. And I explained to them, in a godless universe where there is no ultimate being making right at the end, that's precisely what happens.
Well, I mean, which would they rather have? That there is no God and that's why the Holocaust happened, or there is a God and he didn't care and that's why the Holocaust happened? It seems to me
That's an
that if there
excellent
is,
question. I don't
and
know.
if there's an
Probably,
apathetic God, then that's horrible.
See,
if this God provided an afterlife. But it's
Eddie,
interesting because in traditional Judaism, in the Old Testament, there is no afterlife. The dead know not anything. David slept with his fathers. He didn't go to heaven, and so
Yeah, it was the resurrection of the dead that was
yes.
what they looked forward
Big
to.
Lundy has a point to make.
I have a couple points that I'd like to make. The first is going to that point about when you let go of religion, you sort of let go of the afterlife. And it's true, as was just mentioned, that there are some religions that don't, in fact, believe in a sort of afterlife, heaven, hell kind of thing. You'll find religions of all different stripes and colors that believe in a different set of different types of afterlives. You know, they got the reincarnation thing, you got the circle of life thing. There's the whole spirituality, just kind of moving around the earth thing. There's a whole bunch of different things, and I believe that letting go of religion that is an obstacle to get over when you're trying to get people to let go of religion, because atheism doesn't offer anything insofar as that goes. We don't offer an extended to let go of religion because atheism doesn't offer anything as far as insofar as that goes. We don't offer one, but an aesthetic point of view, that kind of turns some people off when it comes to atheism. It may be true, it may be the most rational conclusion to come to, that to be an atheist and not believe in a God. But it tends to be looked at in a very negative light, because okay, so you're saying that nothing special is going to happen to me, nothing special is going to happen to my loved ones, nothing special is going to happen to people that I consider good, nothing bad is going to happen to people that I consider bad. I prefer the type of divine judgment that I believe in. I prefer the idea that I'm going to live a lot longer. For me, if you're going to dissuade people from that sort of thinking, then there's a lot of routes that one can take, and most namely the idea that an eternal afterlife, whether or not you go to heaven or hell, it really doesn't matter. It's going to end up sucking really bad. That's just one point that I just want to kind of put out there. And the other point that I wanted to make a little while ago was concerning, when you give a speech as to why God doesn't exist, it's not completely necessary to make arguments against the God's existence, which is, I still strongly suggest that people do that, because it kind of gets, for me, it just kind of gets a little boring after a while, saying the same kind of back and forth that happens. I don't have the burden of proof. You have the burden of proof. You have to prove it. You haven't sufficiently proved it, so there's no reason to believe it. Having some positive arguments against a God's existence is a little more persuasive to an outside
Well,
audience.
I agree fully. In fact, when I state that the opponent has the burden of proof, I launch into my 8 or 9 reasons why God does not exist. So I may say that they have the burden of proof because they postulate the supernatural, but I give my positive reasons, absolutely. And not just in a debate, in a speech, by gremlins, and you wouldn't say that the fact that you can't prove that they aren't there doesn't win the argument for me, but it shouldn't be the same. It should be the same with God as the gremlin, and then I launch into the positive arguments. It's even more powerful to set yourself up by saying that you don't have to disprove God and then do it anyway, in a sense. But I agree with you. Those who resist the positive arguments against atheism are denying themselves the core of the persuasive arguments. Absolutely.
I think you guys are getting on to exactly where we need to be heading, the positives. Because when I think of death and I think of why people fear it, I think it's because it's the unknown that people fear. And generally how people approach is how it's treated now. If you've approached the unknown as a kid and you failed and had negative consequences from it, you're going to fear it more than someone who's probably been more successful, who's explored it.
Brad, I would say death is not more of the unknown. It's more of the hating the idea it's the end. Like you did not have enough time to
Oh,
do.
I'm not denying that. I'm giving another perspective, that there's another addition
Oh,
to this equation. That one aspect to get people more comfortable with the idea of, well, we don't know what happens after death. We just know what won't be happening.
We
Uh,
actually
we
do.
know
We
these
actually
things
do.
don't function.
We actually do because 100 years ago, all of us talking to each other right now, we're in a state no different than we will be 100 years from now. And
Yeah,
200 years ago, all of us right now talking to each other were in a condition absolutely no different than the one we will be in 200 years from now.
Well,
yeah,
So in that sense, we do know.
yeah,
socialism is
exactly.
actually
But
more
there's still this aspect of, the this idea of, well, okay, everything's going to change, and obviously everything is. It's all going to stop. In the sense of our consciousness, we're done. We are no more. We're in different states of matter, and they don't function in that way. So consciousness can't function, can't form. Sorry. So I found that, like, for example, with me, when I started to enjoy the unknown and find it more in the beauty, I was able to feel more comfortable with death, and almost look at it like, well, the unknown is a part of us, and as we explore it, we learn more about ourselves. If we learn more about death, we'll learn that is what makes us unique, who we are. That's what helps us develop notions of a goal, of beauty, of value, and why we place these on our lives. And going into what I think it was Big Lottie or Lundy put, the idea of, well, an eternal afterlife's going to suck. This kind of goes into that. If you don't have a goal, you don't have an end result, you don't have value on things, it's useless. It's a different experience than what we have now. So why desire it if it's not even holding anything we want to keep? We want
Because
to
the
keep this and
core,
that.
the
Yeah.
core of most religions, fundamentalist religions, if you look at Abrahamic religions anyways, is an egocentric viewpoint. It's about me. It's about me surviving. It's about me enjoying myself. It's about me being with people I love and doing things I like to do. It's a very narcissistic, egocentric point of view.
and if you're not my friend, you burn.
Yeah, if you don't think like me, you have to think like me, and it's
Well, that
exactly
adds
right.
a different aspect to it. That adds more of a threat.
Well, you
The
see,
idea of,
also one of the things
oh,
too
I'm sorry.
that I think is limiting in America is the absence of not only the refusal to look at the powerful atheistic arguments, but the fact that some people have no idea that certain of the Eastern paths actually come closer to atheism than people realize in their highest forms. And I'm thinking of Buddhism.
Mhm.
If you take, and I had this brief discussion with the Dalai Lama in 1996. Uh, I went to an event. I do support Tibet's right to be free of China, whatever they believe. And I mentioned to him at the time I was an atheist, and he said the only difference between us is I might believe in some little gods. We both don't believe in the big one. And I said to him that the Buddhist concept, ultimate concept of nirvana, is such an extinction of the self, an unraveling of the self. Their belief in what they call anatman, the no self, that it really is not qualitatively different from the atheist's notion of annihilation at the moment of death. I mean, some Eastern Path mystics speak about the being dewdrop into the sea. Then the dewdrop has disappeared. So I think that what has really happened again is because of the monotheistic emphasis on an individual separate deity and individual separate souls that many Americans seem to think that any kind of spirituality must involve some kind of individuation. Remember, the let's say particularly those religions that speak definitively about the afterlife, Christianity and Islam, they never talk about ultimate merger with God. They just talk about frolicking in joy as a separate being in some form. And so it is this notion that only a separate God can preserve you as a separate being forever that makes people, I think, also hope for individual immortality. I mean, if you told the average Christian churchgoer in the United States, after death, you and all your congregants will be joined in some kind of mush communal soul, they wouldn't be too happy.
It's the idea of being above everyone else. This idea that you are not part of the hive mind.
Well, I was gonna say
the
that
whole equation. You got to be separate, better than it.
I was gonna say that, like, the end, like, it's not more of annihilation; it's more of assimilation in a sense. I guess you could say the end of your life.
Exactly.
Because technically it's the end of you, but something still continues. That is, you could say, from you. Your particles, all that stuff. They're still there. They're not gonna disappear and vanish. They're not gonna just vanish. So they'll still continue on. Not as your mind, but they'll still, exist. So you could say that you're being assimilated into the world.
Well, I like to
It's
argue.
more colorful, I guess. It's more colorful. But
when I'm on forums, I like to argue the point of you are the collection of your beliefs, and your beliefs are basically the product of everyone around you, everything you've learned from people around you, all the input you got in. And there's, at least I've not witnessed anything that would relate to it being something outside the system. It's all in the system. It's all in everything around you. You are no individual in the sense of you don't have any power of your own completely. That power you think you have is actually granted to you and given to you by the influence that you had around you.
Right, but right now we have a self-awareness and we are individuated physical beings. In that right now we look on our screens and we aren't all in one body. We're all distinctive embodied beings. And because of the functional brain and functional body, we have self-awareness, which will be extinguished at death. I think that for practical purposes and in the name of honesty, we need to be forthright about how and why death is the end. But it also is, because look at it this way. If, first of all, the argument against disembodied minds cuts against not just life after death, but also God. If every example we have of an intelligent being involves functional critical how do not even think, let alone how do we survive our own deaths. So this is really an important factor. Now, it's interesting because as he got older and got a little bit loose in the head, the formerly great atheist philosopher Antony Flew flipped out a bit and became somewhat of a theist. But I remember when he was being honored by Biola University, William Lane Craig and Doug Guy Vet's University, for his theism. We actually had a phone conversation. I talked to him in England, and he said he didn't know why he was being honored because he didn't believe in a Christian God, and he still felt that death was the end. And I said, well, then this God of yours, what's the point? And he said, exactly. So, but it's something, again, we have to structure our arguments and not hedge on the truth. I actually think that even though it'll take more time, the general public will respect us more if we don't pull punches as long as we're polite than if we try to muffle the full force and effect of our arguments.
Does anyone have a point to make? Because I'm going to invite in Joshua.
I just had one really quick point to make. This goes back way back near the beginning of what we were discussing. But and I tend to do this.
A lot with you, Lundy.
Yeah, this happens a lot with me. I wait until everyone's done talking for a little bit, and I just go, okay, I'm going to go back a little bit. But there was this notion of when you give a speech to people, and you give it like a sort of atheistic speech, kind of like saying, okay, there was the notion
You're breaking up.
of scientific empiricist standpoint, and that people would start to slowly connect the dots a little bit once they understand the different aspects and the idea that God is not there in all these aspects. It reminds me a little bit of, I forget the guy's name, but he worked for Napoleon. Not Napoleon Bonaparte, the midget. Well, he wasn't really a midget, but whatever. So he worked for Napoleon Bonaparte, and he was a map maker, and he made a map. And he documented his making of the map. And Napoleon looked over the documentation, looked over the map, and he goes, "Where's God in this map?"
I don't think it's a map. I don't think it was a map you're referring to. I think you're referring to a guy who made the planets and the stars.
Yeah, that's right. It was a cosmological.
You're talking about Laplace.
Yes,
Yes,
Laplace.
it's like where's God? Where's God in this?
Yeah, where's God? I didn't need him. He was completely unnecessary. And that's essentially, as people in general, as a society start to grow, as far as knowledge is concerned, consciousness raising about different scientific aspects, I think that attitude will be a little more permeated. I don't think God's going to go away at all, but I think that the people invoking him in order to explain things will go down substantially. We won't find, given a decent amount of time and giving a decent amount of explanations and empirical advancements, I see people not anymore invoking perhaps Kalam, hopefully, or any other sort of arguments that is supposed to propose God as a mechanism for anything in the universe, because we've already come to the conclusion that things don't seem to require him from everything that we've ever discovered. Then again, and I'll argue against myself for a moment here, because this is also something I do, and it kind of makes people freaked out. But the other problem that I see with this is that we've already done this over the course of the past, you can just take from the 1600s onward. So many technological advancements, so many advancements in the understanding that we have of the universe itself. All of the mysteries that have ever been solved in the entirety of humankind have never been either God or magic. Yet, we still have people invoking this sort of mechanism. So I'm not certain how effective it would be, but here's hoping.
I mean, the funny
Well, here's the thing. You don't have to be concerned how effective it would be, because it'll be one of many. See, these are not either or. Everything we are saying are components. But what we have to do is we have to be extremely disciplined in now putting it all together. I mean, remember the 19th century, orator Robert Ingersoll was the most heard in-person speaker of any orator in the United States, speaking exclusively against the religious concept of God, and yet he died with his century. It was a magnificent but ultimately false promise. His notoriety didn't survive his century. We have to make sure that we can make the arguments stick. For instance, when the aging preacher Billy Graham does die, you're going to see an outpouring of grief and affection in the United States that you won't see for anyone else. Yesterday, unfortunately, the young son of one of the more popular and well-known fundamentalist ministers, Rick Warren of Orange County, California, committed suicide, young man at the age of 27. And there was this enormous outpouring, which is okay. Yet the prominent son or daughter of a prominent atheist committed suicide. We may not see the same kind of sympathetic outpouring in
People
the
will be
public
like, "Oh,
media,
yeah,
but rather
figures."
questioning. Yeah,
Yeah.
but rather questioning whether there was an existential despair as being brought up in as an atheist that drove one to this. So we can't, among the false paradises that we can't allow ourselves to wallow in, is to think that religion will abate on its own. I used to I used to have this discussion with Paul Kurtz, the founder of the Center for Inquiry and Council for Secular Humanism, who in his later years felt that religion would die out of its own, just as humans' telepathy and even moral sense evolves. And I said, that's too optimistic. Religion, if in fact all presidents of the United States today are more conventionally religious than Thomas Jefferson was more than 200 years ago, we have a lot of work to do. So everything we're talking about is not an either-or proposition. They're all components, and remember, the individual argument and tactics that we use will vary with the audience, and if it's a debate with the debating opponent.
I've heard.
Now I want to ask you guys a question because, older folks like me still see the internet as a strange new world. Do those of you who have primarily an internet presence, do those of you young Turks who blog and tweet, remember for my generation a tweet is what a bird did. I mean, do all of you with your blogs and your podcasts, do you believe that we atheists are ruling the internet more than the theists? I want your opinion on that because I can't assess it. Or are we at least holding them to a draw?
That's difficult to quantify, I think, because I think in logical argument, we completely dominate. Our channels are largely unmoderated. When you look at theist channels and Christian channels, they're largely censored and the comments are tightly controlled. I think in open free debate, we completely dominate in that respect, but I think there's a larger online presence of theist and religious resources.
Can I note a weird statistic, which
Sure.
kind of relates to this? If you look up on Google, you look up the word religion, you get 500 million hits with religion. Atheist, you get 50 million. That's it. It's a 100 to 1 ratio.
Well, to be fair, that's not exactly a very workable statistic. I mean, if you just do a Google search, religion and atheists, there's going to be a lot of overlap. For one thing, there's going to be a lot of atheistic.
Well, close to it. Well, close to it, because
Atheism as a religion would be an example of...
Yeah, that would be an easy example of some overlap there. And there would be actually, because of how non-unified atheism is, you would actually probably find atheists who are out there going, yeah, it's a religion. It's totally a religion. I'm part of this religion. I'm happy to be a part of the religion. You might find some people like that. They'd be wrong.
I'm happy to be with the church. I'm happy to be...
Well, part of the problem is there is more religious people in the world than there are atheists, and that poses the greatest...
Therefore, there's a larger presence.
So you'll have more people out there putting more information out there about religion than you do atheists. Even if every atheist puts something out saying, hey, this is why I believe that there is no...
For every atheist channel I've seen a theist channel. So it is really hard to say like who has more on the forum that I'm on, which is YouTube, and of course they're doing the show with Strife. For every one of our shows or one of our channels, one of our content, one of our videos, there's always another one there.
But also,
what I'd like to actually point out is that what I see as the biggest difference is that the atheists usually are way more organized, and they usually try to bring logic into every discussion, or try to use logic to explain themselves. And most theists and religious people will stretch everything into their favor, no matter what it is. So, I mean, it's not a very fair playing field.
I forget who said it, but somebody, it was a famous person, said science progresses one funeral at a time, or it's like social progress one funeral at a time. What we're seeing is as the younger generations are coming up, I think it's shifting. There's a lot of movement away from religion, fundamentalist religion, and a lot of movement toward more logical thinking, and maybe not specifically atheism, but maybe more skepticism towards religion. And I think that's a positive
I need
swing.
to ask a follow-up on that, because that's crucial, if I may. I want to ask a very important follow-up, and that's that when you look at the power of Campus Crusade for Christ and the enormous gap in money available to on-campus religious fundamentalist recruitment to free thought organizations, leaving the campuses aside, can all of you address whether what all of you and others are doing on the internet, a follow-up to whether we dominate the internet more than the theists, is how successful do you believe those of you who have this internet presence and others, how successful are we in, at least as far as the internet is concerned, making the atheist movement or the skeptical doubting of religion movement more securely a young person's movement?
See, I think we're failing on that degree because I think we're failing on that degree because I think it was like a week or two ago, I started just checking out some religious sites. You know, what are they doing? Because I was curious. And I realized that outside of the fundamentalist sites, you know, where all they're doing is arguing for God, just go into the practical area. Where are all the people themselves? They're not talking about God. They're talking about their boyfriends or how funny it is this Texan speaks and the Texan's trying to act all sexy and all the women are willing. It's basically a Yahoo chat and a Yahoo forum. And
actually, I think
most of the teenagers don't really care.
Yeah. I was going to say something like that. It's because I think it's primarily an issue of science education and logical thinking, and I don't think there's an enthusiasm where that's concerned amongst younger people. And I think it's important to attempt to.
Okay, let me rephrase that. How are we doing in making the internet, atheism on the internet? How good are we doing in reaching 18 to 35-year-olds?
We're doing fine on that.
Can I say
we're doing good.
I would say we're doing very good. If you
compared to the theists, are we doing?
Oh, we're doing much better.
If you look on YouTube, for instance, which is one of the main places this discourse kind of goes down outside of like forums and the like, if you look at an atheist channel, chances are very good. Like, you might find just as many theist channels as you do atheist channels, but the atheist channels tend to have way more views, way more subscribers, way more likes and dislikes. There's a lot of group mentality kind of going on. Not really group mentality, but like it's appealing to a wide audience as far as YouTube is concerned, at the very least. When it comes to the atheist versus theism thing. So theists, they get a little bit of attention, and a lot of the attention that they get actually also comes in the form of atheists who disagree with them. So you'll find, if they allow ratings on their channels, you'll find a lot of like dislikes rather than likes. You won't. It's very hard. You're very hard pressed to find a whole lot of theist channels that aren't lambasted by the massive amount of online atheists who are like out there looking for an argument.
And I would like to make the point as well.
You got to keep in mind, guys, that I've noticed a lot, and I mean, atheists generally, like, for example, at least in technology, most of the atheists I know are really good at computers. And I've noticed that there are a lot of people who have those bots that basically are set up to spam thumbs downs on videos. So, and I'm pretty sure, even though it might seem biased, that the atheists use that more often than the theists do.
I've not.
So,
I've never heard of it. No.
I think that we're actually seeing a trend of people moving to non-denominational, which means people are moving away from religion. And I think that's actually spurred off because of the internet, because people are starting to have information at their fingertips, and the more information people have at their fingertips, the more they're able to go, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And I would like to point out, in regards to that, it's not for me an idea of a competing ideology. I think that's harmful. When you get entrenched in an ideology, you get dogmatic. To have to make converts, I have to bring people over to my side of thinking, and it's not that for me. For me, what it is combating the harmful effects of fundamentalism and combating young earth creationism with proper scientific peer-reviewed information, combating homophobia and the fundamentalist stand against the homosexual community. and the biblical verses in regards to that with science and logic and reason. It's if we just are holding up an ideology and competing in place with say their ideologies, with a religious ideology, then I think we've missed the mark. We've got really good and important information to put out there, and I think the information speaks for itself.
I would totally agree with that. It sort of gets into a little more political argument than it is an actual sort of an epistemological argument, I guess, a philosophical argument. I like to keep it to the philosophical aspects, which also, of course, includes the scientific aspects, not excluding science from philosophy. I tend to think of them as two parts of one machine. I like to focus it more on that, more towards finding truth rather than. This is actually an issue that I've had with the whole popularization of atheism as it's going on right now. We tend to get a lot of people who become atheists and they think that they're smarter than all the religious people because I'm an atheist. I figured it out, so I'm smart, guys, and you're all dumb and you all have problems with your brains, and that's the reason why you believe in a religion. Like that's the problem that's the problem that seems to be permeating at least mainstream atheism fans, as it were. So that happens a lot, and that's a bit of an issue, and that sort of polarizes people into sort of the same way that the Republican versus Democrat debate tends to go, where people are butting heads more than they're actually trying to move towards one goal of truth.
I don't so much mind if someone's
Let's be very careful
theist.
that we're not buying into, we're not letting the fox guard the hen house. I know a lot of those of us involved in the atheist movement are not claiming infallibility. We just rely on the strength of our arguments. And many times it'll be the theist who is the one claiming absolute knowledge but will accuse us of arrogance. And that again is the automatic prejudice that we begin having against us. So this is why I take the view that we can't let it, just like I know some atheists who will say, well, we can't appear to be anti-religion. And I'll say, well, we can't appear and we shouldn't appear to want religion to have less rights than we do in the legal system. But when Pope Benedict would rip into atheism and secularism, he didn't care about appearing to be anti-atheist. So we have to make sure that we don't let the powerful, dominant religious culture even subconsciously drive us into the realm of being self-hating atheists where we buy into their characterization of us. Now, it's true that some of us might occasionally say things which might be arrogant or offensive. I don't think it at all accumulates to how many times the religious do it. But I really don't see us doing that. What I see the theists doing is being unable to respond to our arguments, are portraying us as putting ourselves up as being intellectually superior. And we can't let them do that to us.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. And if you stick to the offline world, when you stick to the books, when you stick to the live debates, when you stick to the actual substance that's going on outside of the internet, I would agree that tends not to happen near as much as when you actually look on the internet. When you go on YouTube, for instance, which again is a place where a lot of the discourse is going on the internet, you go to just about any theistic channel, any theistic page, you will find a substantial amount of comments from atheists just going, "You're religious because you're stupid. You're religious because you're an idiot." That's
don't confuse a troll. Yeah, don't confuse a troll with honesty. Okay. A lot of them are just trolls. So.
Well, it's really hard. Poe's law. It's really hard to tell when someone is trolling when that is actually something that does go on. I mean, I'll bring that Bionic Dance, for instance. She is not a troll, but she does think that all religious people are stupid. And that is a fact. And she has a lot of fans that agree with her. So when she makes her comments saying, if we're in error as far as history is concerned, because we have the things like the Protestant work ethic that kind of helped out the culmination of culture in a way, and we have the fact that many colleges were founded on religious bases before they were converted to a more secular learning environment. We would not have a lot of the things that we do have right now without religion. Now, it's true that religion did serve its purpose, and I feel that these days it's kind of outlived its purpose and needs to move on and go away. That's my current stance as far as religion goes. But there's a lot of people who are very arrogant, well, not arrogant, but ignorant about these kinds of issues, and that kind of leads to a bit of a problem when it comes to the communication, because there are people out there who not only are subscribed to people who believe this, but also believe it themselves, who say the world would have been completely 100% better if no religion ever existed ever, and that's not necessarily the case.
No, I think the bigger issue is not that whether there is a God or there isn't a God, or that religion is true or isn't true. I think the bigger issue is the harm done by fundamentalist religion, the harm done by the text. When if they're out there marching on the street, God hates fags, or if they're hindering medical advancement, or if they're teaching the world was created 6,000 years ago and science is our enemy, these things have tangible harm to society. And while the discussion of whether there is a God or isn't a God is an important one to have, I think there are more important issues to tackle before we often need to make the other ones a centerpiece.
I do want to address this because it's relevant, but it's also sort of a warning. The big movement on hate religion, but love Jesus, that one poem that came out there, I like to use as the example. While it might seem to some people as a good thing, religion's losing its grip, it's actually I've noticed at least, sort of a hidden tactic I've noticed for fundamentalists who are claiming not to be part of a religion, to try to get these people to almost join their religion. And I've noticed a lot of people seem to ignore that. Or if they don't ignore it, they address it so negatively that it almost supports the point that the message is trying to send. And it's trying to say, oh, well, atheism is a religion, and check it out. Look how evil and horrid they are when they respond to this video. We're insulting them. And that's something I think also needs to be addressed, because it's a big movement.
Well, what I think needs to be addressed is actually that a lot of atheists are getting really hung up on labels. Like, are you an atheist or agnostic? They want to know exactly what you believe. And I don't really have a label for myself. I don't know if there's a God, but I don't think that there is. But I don't think I'm an atheist. But I don't think I'm a theist either.
I mean, there's a difference between saying, okay, there may be a God, and saying, well, actually, the evidence is clearly against there being a literal God as put forward by the Old Testament of the Bible. I mean, we can say that Thor doesn't exist, or Xenu doesn't exist.
But I usually say it's something like, there's no man-made concept of God that I consider acceptable. Whether there is or isn't, there is not one.
We cannot buy into the theists' default notion. Just like you can't know for sure if gremlins from the fifth dimension are made in the attic because we can't find another cause. I think can be just as comfortable that there is no God. So
what I always say is something
what
like
happens
this.
is we never have. Even William Lane Craig admits that he is debating a probabilistic argument. So we don't have to be shy, reticent about the fact that we have enough evidence thus far to say that the existence of God is as unlikely as the existence of any other paranormal being, maybe even more so, because even space aliens would be physical creatures that are embodied. So
I always just say I have no use for a hypothesis that is completely divested of any evidence. I mean,
and of course, and then as we have the positive arguments for atheism. So again, what we atheists have to do is we don't have to allow the theists, again, you don't let the fox guard the hen house, to somehow make God still a more plausible postulate than any other paranormal claim. You don't see people saying, I don't believe in Santa Claus, but maybe. See, we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that. Epistemologically, we're not in a poorer situation than those who don't believe in Santa Claus. I mean, even Santa Claus would be more plausible than God. It's a physical being. I think that if we say the overwhelming weight of the evidence makes it far more likely than not that there is no God and that the universe is natural, not supernatural, we're safe.
Well, I think the second they start assigning a value to what their God is, you can start disproving it.
Exactly.
Well, they have to bring him into the natural world, and then it has to be quantifiable in some sense.
Well,
right.
This is why the agnostic case.
And saying that there might be a God, you can't disprove that, at all. But the second you start assigning value to what that God can do, or how that God is, what he thinks, how he behaves, then you can start disproving them. Because then you have to start answering the questions, well, how do you know? What makes your knowledge any greater than mine on the subject? You can start tearing apart at that point. Until they start assigning value to what their God is, I think atheists should not be out there trying to disprove God in general. You can start disproving God. That's how the Greek myths got overturned. It's how every religion gets overturned. It's taken.
Well, also remember, we have every right when we debate. I always say that my target is a supposed ultimate being who's self-conscious, all-powerful, all-good, and all-knowing. And I will not debate something less than that because it's just a ploy. Now, sometimes when I debate Christian philosophers, and Doug Geivett and Peter Payne try to pull this on me, where they come into the debate and they want to artificially strip down the deity they're defending and say, we're not defending the Christian God. We're
so
just
dishonest.
defending, and what I do is I smoke them out. It's sort of like I poke them until they extend a limb, and I can grab onto that. Mm-hmm. And certainly they will eventually slip, well, we Christians believe, and I say, gotcha. But the thing is, even if one wants to do a generic God, there's a problem, because if there is a God, we can expect that this being would have given us a reliable revelation. If they can't point to a reliable revelation, then how do we know the knowledge of this God? Now, some will say, well, he's written it in our hearts. Well, then how come different things are written in my hearts? As I said, how come my opponent believes that homosexuality is a grave sin, and I think it's perfectly fine for those who are so biologically structured? Again, we don't have to allow them to artificially jump into a debate with the most bare-bones God imaginable so they have less to defend.
They'll usually
that God is. I actually think that God is actually easier to disprove than a all-powerful God, because an all-powerful God, they can just say, well, he just decided that you don't know. That's all they have to say. You can't argue with that. When they start stripping it down, like, let's look at William Lane Craig, and his arguments are clearly ridiculous for the notion that he says that his God is out of space and time. Well, the problem with that is he doesn't know quantum physics enough to know that space is just our universe. So if he's outside of our space, that's one thing, but if he's out of time, that means that God is basically frozen and meaningless.
I think most of the evidence that would be put forward for a person's personal God would be that they have this lifelong answers to prayer and personal experience in assigning supernatural explanations to certain events. And I mean, I explain to people that, well, it's what confirmation bias is, but they can't get over the fact that they've gathered up this huge amount of answers to prayer that are mostly very minor things, and kind of put them in a list and ignored all the times where they haven't had their prayers answered, or whether it would have happened by chance, and they just say, see, it's real, and they're convinced of it.
You know, what I've noticed we've all addressed, and I tend to like to use in, well, I don't do it as much anymore because most of the time it's just on basic social things and my debates. But before, when I used to discuss God, I went to the agnostic questions, which the agnostic claim, anyone who doesn't understand, who's not familiar with that, is simply that the definition of God is so meaningless that until someone defines a meaningful definition, we have nowhere to start. And so I will place that challenge upon them. And there's a purpose for this. By doing this, I can help them examine their understanding of their own God, and through that point out what it might actually be. Sometimes I'll point out, hey, your God seems to be your ego. Now, most of the time I try to avoid that because that usually insults somebody. But essentially that's the goal. The goal is to show that their God is essentially them, who they want to be, what they desire.
Let's just say that we have to understand that there are different kinds of agnostics. Some agnostics say that the evidence for and against a supernatural
No, not
being...
agnostic. Agnostic. It starts with an I.
Agnostic, okay. Because when you mean agnostic, there's another term for that, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the philosophers teaches at Cypress College in Orange County, California. Greg Cavan calls himself a non-cognitivist, saying that God language itself is incoherent. Is that what you mean by the atheist?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense. Like, for example, here's a common definition of God. A spaceless, timeless, materialless, eternal entity that's omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient and created the universe. So we'll break that definition down. So we have this timeless, that, okay, you told me it's without time, eternal, which basically means timeless, without time, materialist, without material, what is it? You know, we're asking, what is it? And they'll say, oh, well, it's divine, and I'll look up what divine means. Divine means godlike. Okay, so God is God. We still have a definition
it's God,
here.
Yes.
Yeah, and then eventually...
They know who God is. I mean, come on.
Eventually, God is just to claim the universe was created. And they're like, whoa, okay. So I got to work on my definition here. Yes, you do. Until we can actually have a conversation here,
We see,
you need to make your conversation on God, not your claim.
I can understand when someone says God is all-powerful, all-good, and all-knowing, and I can argue against that. I also think, and here philosopher Ted Drange, Theodore Drange, has been pushing me in this direction in terms of incompatible properties, where he claims that, particularly between omnipotence and omniscience, there's a conflict. That if you are omnipotent, you can change your mind. If you change your mind, you're not all-knowing. It's just, for instance, in the Bible where it says, and God repented of the evil he sought to do to his people. Well, how could God, who knows the future, repent? It wasn't repentance because he always knew he ultimately wouldn't do the evil. So I think incompatible properties is promising.
I like this approach. I'd say, oh, your God's all-powerful, right? No, like, yeah. But, okay, so he obviously can't do illogical things. He can't do the impossible because that's nonsensical. You'd be like, yes. So basically, he is governed. His abilities are limited to what's possible in the universe. Yes. So your God is essentially the universe. And, you know, that kind
that's where the argument for miracles comes in.
Sorry. Atheistic coffee, what'd you say?
That's where the argument for miracles would be invoked. It would say that, well, God transcends nature and he can change things. He can make the sun stand still in the sky, that kind of crap.
Yeah. And then, Edward, you were saying?
Yeah, but you see, the point is that as we develop these arguments, again, let's not let the theists be the ones to define our parameters. Again, not letting the fox guard the hen house, not letting the theist have some kind of special pleading,
Well,
which all other paranormal claims.
God doesn't exist, and that's where the problem. A lot of theists or a lot of atheists run into the problem is they start trying to prove it. You can't prove that God doesn't exist. You can prove that the qualities that you're assigning to your God, you have no way of knowing.
That's right, Guesty.
Hopefully, you have no way of knowing. So once you start assigning those values and everything, then you can start ripping that apart. And I mean, that's where we run into where I think a lot of atheists fall short. They start going after one type, and they keep going after it. And I think that going after one type of religion is fine, because then you can get a better grasp of what they're thinking and how they're going to respond, and you can develop responses to that. So basically, we all need to just start specializing in just what we believe in, and try to understand why we don't believe in Christianity, why we don't believe in the Muslim faith, why we don't believe in, and because generally we just go, because it sounds nuts. That's most atheists' answers, and most agnostic. It sounds nuts. I mean, but we really need to understand it a little bit better.
Well, I think all of us, those of us even who call ourselves atheists, let's say that there were a God, we would be less surprised to find a God if there is one. I mean, we would be surprised, very surprised, but we would be less surprised to find that the God that exists judges us on our basic goodness rather than judges us on what religion we choose. I mean, we would still be within the realm of being very surprised. We would be less surprised to find a God that says, I judge you by how you treat others than I judge you by how you pray to me. We would still be less surprised by a God that judges us on our goodness, not on what religion we choose.
I'd just be surprised if I found a God that actually judges. That's what would surprise me.
Right. But if you find a judging God, you would still be much less horrified at one that judges you on how you treat others than judges you on how you worship this God.
Yeah, we'll see how they do judge. I mean, if they judge us, hey, you may not believe to me, but hey, you've helped a lot of people, you've done good for your community, you didn't murder anybody, so you know what, Ferris wheel is to the left.
Ferris wheel's to the left.
Yeah,
most religions set up to keep people in line and to generate revenue. That's what religion is for. And
that's what it's destined to become. But originally, it's just meant to develop culture. People got together, they have a common, just like anything that we all hold in common. Developed culture originally.
Yeah, originally it was to explain stuff they didn't understand. And
exactly.
But now in the last couple of thousand years, it's become about generating revenue and also keeping
moneymaker.
Money making and keeping people in line.
I think you've seen the BS Kent Hovind was doing with that, we need like another $140,000 to go. Dude, you own 9 properties.
Yeah, but you see, this is our task. Our task is to show society that religion was invented for a purpose of social control and that it is not the possessor of intrinsic metaphysical truth.
Well,
see, this is where our arguments come in. This is very important for, this is where the positive arguments for atheism come in to show that this is not a description of an objectively existing being and what that being wants from us. What it rather is just something invented for social control that doesn't have independent existence, just a fabrication for keeping people in line.
Yeah, it just tells you what you can't do. And it doesn't give you a clear goal, objective, except, you'll live forever. Or you'll avoid eternal suffering. But there's no other objective. To me, it's like, okay, well, then it's just control. So you hit it right on the nail.
Can I welcome Stephen Christopher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are idiots. Retards.
Speaking of God.
Well, that wasn't
speaking
very
of
nice.
God,
So, Chris, you wanted to say something?
Very
idiots,
intellectual argument
got
here.
yeah,
Boss is making
you
an
gotta actually
intellectual
make an
argument here.
argument.
Hold on.
Make an actual argument before calling us retards.
No.
I mean, come on.
Actually, I think he's making a good one. Let's hear him out. He's going to make a very
Yeah, let's
intellectual
hear him
argument.
Wasn't a very good introduction, I might say.
Well, let's not judge it. Let's hear his intellectualism.
Okay.
So, you have the floor, Steve.
Intellectually, there's glass in the sky. Ice attached to the glass. The ice is going to fall down and destroy humanity.
Slower. You're speaking too fast for us. Slow down.
Take it
Some of
easy.
us aren't that smart.
Are
Remember?
idiots, so
Ice is gonna come down.
Actually, first off, I would like to just issue you a challenge before you talk. If speaking as an idiot, I would like to, if you could present your case without solely trying to conjure an image in my mind. I need some kind of reason to something tangible, not just say words and think I should conjure these images in my mind and believe.
I'm really not here to convince you of anything. I'm just here to show you my presence, basically, and that I'm going to be exalted by the powers that be very soon, so the whole world will know about me very soon. So anyway, I'm just trying to help you understand it. It's kind of out of my mercy that I'm actually relating to.
So there's a power above you?
No,
Let him finish.
Okay, go ahead. Just say what you need to say.
Yes.
It's kind of like out of my mercy that I'm coming down and relating to you on this lateral level.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Because my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. My ways are higher than your ways.
Demonstrate such a thing.
Well, I'm just curious how much higher.
Demonstrate it.
That kind of goes along with putting the Lord thy God to the test by asking him to do some kind of miracle.
Yes, just take it as a Gideon's fleece.
hold on. So you think you're God?
Gideon's fleece is no different than Satan tempting Jesus in the wilderness. There's a time and a season for that.
No, guys, he's right.
God-
He's got a point there. We shouldn't tempt him. But we are allowed to ask some questions, and if he's willing to answer.
This current wicked and unbelieving generation doesn't even believe that I'm here, doesn't even recognize or acknowledge me. Why should I perform any fucking signs and miracles for you idiots? Why?
I'm just asking for words, dude.
To alleviate all doubt?
Huh? To alleviate doubt. I'm giving you... No, I'm relating to your scientific level. That's what I want to talk about, science.
Okay, so let's talk about science.
Let's talk about science then.
Yes.
Let's talk about science. Hold on, guys.
Let him talk about science, guys. Hold on.
I have to be a particle physicist, so I'd like to hear this. So let's let him talk for a minute. So go ahead, Steve. Let's talk science.
Okay.
We'll be quiet.
Yeah, everyone mute your mics.
All right, mute.
Go ahead, Steve.
Can you tell me why you don't think there's a layer of glass up in the sky at about 100 kilometers high?
Because we've sent space shuttles out to space. We've also been to Mars, and Mars.
Wait a minute, please. How do you know that you've been to Mars?
No,
I was just curious.
It's rover to Mars.
How do you know
I had
that?
a few questions. Is it actually made of glass?
Hold on. Yeah, hold on.
Like real glass, or is it like a special?
How is that
material?
relevant? Whether or not, even if you did send a rover to Mars, how is it relevant whether or not? I mean, don't you think
Mars happens to be more than 100 kilometers above Earth, so it would be beyond your glass sphere.
Well, yeah, but don't you think it would be penetrable? This glass ceiling
Is
in
it?
the sky.
And it's not glass.
Is it?
Exactly why I'm asking this question, guys. What is it made of?
I would think that space vehicles like the space shuttle, the reason why they have a flush, flat bottom and it has a heat shield which is able to resist high temperatures is probably because they glide through it and they melt through the glass.
What the fuck
You mean the
is going
atmosphere?
on here?
What do you mean, what the fuck?
It is called
we're
the
talking about-
atmosphere. The thing is that when I live in Florida, okay? I've seen the space shuttle launch. There is no glass shattering.
Well, all we know, Redline, is he might be talking about the atmosphere.
That you guys are ignorant of, okay? There's powers
This is
above.
just embarrassing.
They laugh.
No, guys, you won't let him finish. I need to hear why he calls it glass for the first
Yes,
time.
I want to hear this too. Everybody mute your damn mics.
Please mute them. That's why I asked you to mute.
One at a time.
Look, dude, he asked a question. Just don't ask a question. Just state your case.
Let me. There are a couple of mysteries that cosmology, modern conventional cosmology, has failed to understand the provenance of certain objects that fall from space, namely tektites and ice chunks, which they call megacriometeors. So scientists can't figure out where they.
And they actually come from our asteroid belt.
No, you're full of shit.
No, I actually not.
No, this guy's God, so he might know where they come from. Where do they come from?
Okay, then can you tell me where they come from? If they don't come from the asteroid belt?
They come from the glass sky. When a meteor crashes through the glass sky, the reason why you see shooting stars in the first place is kind of like debris hitting the windshield and causing.
Okay, but where are they coming from?
They're coming from inner space. Inner space is where the meteors come from. The glass sky is the boundary line between inner space and our atmosphere. And attached to that glass sky is a mantle of ice. That's where the megacriometeors come from. That's why I don't think you probably haven't really, have you heard how big chunks of ice just mysteriously fall to the ground? Do you know where they're coming from?
Actually, the best estimate of what's actually happening there is that ice particles form, and as they're forming, more ice particles form and chunks of land. It's called hell, dude. That's what it's called.
Because actually, there's actually two so-called cosmologist doctors that are scratching their head concerning the provenance of these ice chunks. Dr. David Travis of the University of Whitewater in Wisconsin and Dr. Jesus Martinez Frias from Spain.
It's always the argument from authority, isn't it?
They don't know where
they might be his prophets. I want to hear more about this.
No. They don't. See, a lot of people think it possibly can come from an airplane, like ice from a lavatory or the wing of an airplane. But no, actually, no, because all of lavatory ice that falls to the ground is actually a dyed blue color.
Actually, that's not true.
Is blue your favorite color?
How's that relevant, asshole?
Frag, one more time, Frag.
I was just curious.
No,
these are relevant questions, though.
You're just being a dick, and you sound like one too. Anyway,
what do you get out of
is
this?
that your fault?
Hang on.
What do you get out of trolling like this?
Anyway,
Pragmatic is anything but a dick. He's actually been one of the more respectful ones here, so show him some respect.
Yeah.
No, I don't need a respect here. Actually, if he made me a dick, then I'm a dick. I mean, he's God.
No, the fact is that Steve, I don't give a shit if you're God. Show some fucking respect.
You show it to
he
me,
doesn't have to. He doesn't have to because he's God. I mean, I have to show him respect.
Respect.
That's the fact.
I mirror the way I'm treated. In Psalm 18, it says I'm upright to the upright and I'm froward to the froward. You dicks are froward. So fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you.
What do you get out of trolling like this? I mean,
it's not called trolling. It's called presenting true empirical scientific evidence.
Do you really believe this crap? Do you really believe it?
And the Earth is stationary.
You have these meds.
Okay. What the hell?
The sun is going to stop, and it's going to fucking decimate the entire world. And you need to take shelter.
That's going to decimate it? So only 1/10 of it's going to go away?
These assholes.
Excuse me, Steve. Steve, are you claiming to be God?
God is
wait. We have an empirical test here. Folks, I have an empirical test. Steve, if you're claiming to be God, would you please have the most beautiful 22-year-old woman, perfectly formed, come through my door right now?
Why should I do that for you?
The greatest earthly delights that a man can experience, and then I might shift my...
I don't even like you. Why would I do that for you?
Look, I think he's bringing up an interesting point here because
you're God on earth.
No, I think that because we're getting into astronomy and cosmology here.
By the way, I'm proving to you that I'm God. Hey, I'm forward to the forward.
Hey, just a second.
You guys
said a few things. You said a few things about
atheistic, fucking stupid ass retards because you don't recognize that you live inside the Earth. and there's glass up in the sky. And NASA knows about this.
Maybe it could be the other way around.
I would like to look.
Intelligent military forces know about this, but you fuckers, you're so fucking busy talking about whether or not God exists. You guys are
Steve,
fucking
is the glass half empty or half full?
Yo, I'm gonna leave you now because
Go.
you need to lick your wounds. Lick your wounds.
You're God. You can leave if you feel like it.
We are actually trying to talk about facts here, and you obviously can't handle it. So go, just go.
Okay. Let me give you a
Thanks,
summary.
Steve, guys.
Let me give you a
Not thank
summary
God.
of what Steve believes.
I love trolls like this because they're hilarious.
Let me go with what Steve believes. He thinks we're in the inverted egg. There's an inner space, and there's a sun in the middle.
Look, this is really important. This is really important because I come up against creationists all the time, and I talk to them about the starlight problem. I talk to them about cosmology, the speed of light, cosmological distance, deep time. These are huge questions, and there's really good facts. And we start with where astronomy and cosmology started, with the discovery of parallax. And we discover how far away the moon is from the Earth and how far the sun is away from the Earth. I mean, we know these things. These were measured a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. And we started measuring parallax to stars and to comets, and we know the distances. And for somebody like that to come on and say these baseless things, I think it really demonstrates that people can believe all kinds of crap, but there are some things that we've found out that we know. We know how to work these things out, and to throw your lot in with the people that just say baseless nonsense is. I think he demonstrates a really important standpoint, because it's somebody who just believes what he wants to believe.
That beautiful 22-year-old woman at my door that I asked him to, which is a failure to demonstrate his divine prowess. He won't even take mercy on an old man. What kind of God is that?
You know that you met God. The one thing your one request of God.
Gentlemen, I'm a half hour over the time I have. I have to get to work to my office. So thank you, and I will leave you now. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Edward, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You were quite a pleasure.
He was great, not like the God Man, but he was so.
Well,
yes.
I mean,
I thought the God Man was great.
My question for Steve would be, what the hell's holding up the sky? What is holding the sky up? Like, what doesn't cause this meteor to hit the sky, causing it to fall?
I don't engage with
I
these.
think my biggest question would be is the perspective problem that we would have if his model of our world was true. The perspective that we would have would be that the horizon would be inverted, not extra.
And also, with less people in, I actually want to take control of the after show. Invite Stevie back on with less people, so that there'll be less screaming, so he can explain to me just what the fuck he is actually talking about.
I want to understand what
he's not talking about anything. He doesn't have anything to say. He's just shooting out his ass. It's nonsense.
Can I just?
Well, maybe we can find out if his glass is half empty or half full. You know, that's an interesting question.
It's